in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. May I just read that last verse with you again? But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or sister is not under bondage. Let me tell you what that Greek word bondage actually means. It's doulo, and it means to be in a state of servility, of slavery, of being trampled upon, of being treated as a vassal slave or as a chattel mortgage. When your partner begins to treat you cruelly, then you are no longer, you don't have to stay into that. You can move out. Now, they say, based upon Matthew 5 and 19, which we'll get to in a few moments, they say that means that you can leave and get married to someone else. Will not compute. Unless you want to admit that Paul the Apostle was paranoid, you cannot, Paul the Apostle was schizophrenic. Because here in verses, what were they? Verses 10 and 11, he said unto the married, you can separate but remain single or be reconciled. Look over in verse 39 of that same chapter. The wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth, but if her husband be dead, she's at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord. So here he says you can separate, live singly until you reconcile and get back together again. Here he says you are bound together until death, and then if your partner dies and you're a Christian, you can marry again, but only in the Lord. Do you think Paul's going to come in the middle of that and say, okay, you can get divorced and you can marry someone else? Not unless he's schizophrenic. I don't think he is. In fact, I know he isn't. So that translation they're giving you is humanistic, and it was implanted in the church by Desiderius Erasmus, the prince of humanists. Most people do not know that, and most pastors don't want to hear it. I'll tell you, many of the pastors today and many of the evangelical churches that are trying to build these great big churches, I'm just about as welcome around their flock as a ham sandwich in a Jewish synagogue. They don't want me around for any cause. They don't want their people to know that they're not supposed to get divorced and remarried. Hebrews 13. Believe me, I'm trying to hurry. Hebrews 13. Verse 4. Marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. That word whoremongers is porneos, which is the same word used for fornicators. Fornicators and idolaters and adulterers God will judge. Malachi, the 2nd chapter, I already read that to you a while ago. That's another clear verse that says that you became one by your marriage vows. Malachi 2:14 through 16. Now, let's quickly go to the unclear verses. Matthew 19. Matthew 19, verses 5 through 12. And said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, glued together, let not man put asunder. And they say unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and to put her away? And he saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you that whosoever shall put away his wife, here it is, except it be for what? For what? Oh, it's not adultery? Doesn't yours say adultery? You know what your new reversed visions, I call them, revised versions say? Except for sexual immorality, except for sexual impurity. That isn't what it says at all. The two words that are used in here, let me read it to you now. And shall marry another whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, porneia, and shall marry another committeth adultery, moikia, and whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. Now, they say the word porneia means any kind of sexual impurity. Now, get this down clearly, please. It's right. They're right. There are places in the New Testament where the word porneia means any kind of sexual impurity. It says flee fornication. That means flee any kind of sexual impurity. They're right. If I were to say to you, here is a basket of fruit, and it had oranges, apples, bananas, pears, peaches, and all that stuff, I would be absolutely honest, wouldn't I? There's a basket of fruit. Would that be a proper statement to make? If there was a basket of fruit there? Okay, or would this be proper too? I say, well, here's a basket, and in it are some grapes, some apples, some oranges, some pears, some peaches, bananas. Would that be proper too? But you see, now I'm being very specific, aren't I? And they say, well, what he said, except to be for fornication, means any kind of sexual impurity. Not at all. Jesus was being very specific. What was it that Joseph thought Mary had committed? Fornication. They still weren't married. It was sex between singles. Now, get this down. Matthew is written to the Jews. You'll find the lineage of Mary and Joseph in the beginning of it. Every time Jesus talked about the kingdom of God, he would talk about the kingdom of heaven in Matthew. But over in Mark and Luke, it's always the kingdom of God. In Matthew, it's kingdom of heaven. Why? Because the Jews were always saying, oh, we're going to have a kingdom here on earth. So every time he spoke of it in Matthew, he'd say, no, it's the kingdom of heaven. Oh, it's not going to be here on earth. No, it's the kingdom of heaven. But when he got to the Gentiles, it didn't make any difference. So he talked about the kingdom of God. They understood that. This is written to the Jews. And Jesus knew they had an idiosyncrasy in their society, which was called betrothal. When a young man wanted to marry some young girl, he would come to her with witnesses and say, will you marry me? And of course, the two fathers, way ahead of time, got that lined up. They'd already said, well, why don't you have your daughter Leah marry my son Jacob? I think that's a good idea. Let's just tell them that's what they're going to do. So, they picked out their marriage partners for them. And some people say, oh, that'd be terrible. Let me tell you something. They didn't have near the mess we've got. Hello? So he would come to her and say, will you be my bride? And he'd set a little cup of wine in front of her. And if she accepted it, she would drink that little cup of wine. She had to drink it all. She just took a sip and meant no. If she drank it all, that means she accepted it. And then he would give some dowry to her parents, and then they would plan toward the marriage. Now, by the way, you ever wonder why Jesus, when he gave the communion cup, he says, drink ye all of it? You going to accept my engagement? Drink ye all of it. If you're going to be engaged to me, drink all of it. By the way, you're only engaged to Jesus Christ, and if during the time of engagement one or the other commits adultery, there's grounds for divorce. I don't know, Baptists don't like to hear that. But they would drink it, then they would be engaged. Now, during that time of engagement, society in that day would treat them as though they were married, as far as they weren't looking around anymore. Mary, the wife of Joseph, being betrothed to him. Joseph, the husband of Mary, being betrothed to him. But now get this, in order for them to break that engagement, they had to get a legal divorce. Their engagement had to have a divorce because it was a public declaration that she would marry him, and he gave dowry. They had to go through the process of getting a divorce. Very important for you to understand why this unclear verse is saying what it's saying. It's not saying except for sexual immorality. It's saying if during the time of engagement one or the other was found to have committed fornication, then and then only was it grounds for divorce. Now let's read it again. Whosoever shall put away his wife. Oh, they're talking about wife and husband. That's right. Mary, the wife of Joseph. Joseph, the husband of Mary, during the engagement period. Whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery, and whosoever marrieth her that is put away doth commit adultery. Now watch what the disciples, how they responded to this. He hit them with something and knocked them for a loop. Remember, Hillel and Shammai already said you can get married divorced for almost any reason under the sun. Some were very restrictive, but others were very liberal. So they understood that already. Well, I can get divorced for this or this and this. And Jesus, when he told them this, they said, what? Are you saying that we can never divorce once we get married? It's better never to marry. Isn't that what they said? His disciples say unto him, if the case of the man is so with his wife, it's not good to marry. Hey, you mean we're locked in for... He hit them right between the eyes, or something they never had before. That's because he said, but from the beginning, Moses allowed that, but from the beginning it never was so. And I say unto you, in other words, forget what's in the past now. We're going back to what God says. Now there's one other unclear portion, and that's found in Deuteronomy, the 24th chapter. I've got to deal with this for you. This is the one that they're going to choke over and choke over and choke over. They don't like to hear it. In fact, we had a pastor in the group last night that had been putting this down the throat of 3 ladies that were in the meeting last night, and kept telling them they were absolutely wrong, because in Deuteronomy it said once you got divorced and remarried, you can never go back to your first partner.